Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Friday, August 16th. Hopefully, everybody's having a good day so far today. We've got another New York Jets preseason preview to get into today on the podcast as the New York Jets are down in Charlotte, North Carolina to face off against the Carolina Panthers in week 2 of the NFL preseason. After a win last week, the New York Jets get set for a second of 3 matchups this preseason. They will close things out next week back at MetLife Stadium against the New York Giants. So we will get into all of what you need to know for this week's matchup today on the podcast. Now, before we begin, let me tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at SeatGeek. SeatGeek is an app that delivers tickets from all over the internet and puts it into one spot to make it easier for you, the buyer. What makes SeatGeek so great is you know what type of deal you are getting on the tickets you are purchasing. They rate each ticket on a scale from 1 to 10 and look for the green dots on the seating chart. Green dots means good. Green means good. Look for those dots. Those are the good deals. Those are the tickets you want to purchase. Plus, my viewers, click the link in the description down below. That'll take you to download the SeatGeek app. Use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. And again, this is anything, not just football, not just sports, plays, concerts, shows, you name it. If you can buy a ticket, SeatGeek has it. Promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Also, my friends over at Huga House. You see me wearing my Huga House hat all the time on the podcast. If you want the hat that I wear all the time, or any of the hats seen on Aaron Rodgers, even Shane Gillis, there are so many athletes and celebrities. Shohei Ohtani, Tyler Conklin, division rival Josh Allen. So many athletes and celebrities wear the Huga House vintage inspired hats. Click the link in the description down below. That'll take you to the Huga House store and use promo code BUBS for 15% off any purchase and get yourself some of the same swag that QB1 rocks. Again, that is promo code BUBS for 15% off. All right, now let's get into today's podcast as the New York Jets get set to face the Carolina Panthers. This is episode 357 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you as always for joining me. For those of you tuning on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. We are only 5 subscribers away from 400, so would love to get there by the end of the weekend. So make sure to like and subscribe. I appreciate all of your support as always. Now, some of the odds in this game, Jets come in here 1.5 point favorites. Over under is set at 31.5 for this one. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, Jets, Panthers, Bank of America Stadium. Second year in a row that these two teams face off in the preseason. Last year, when the Jets played the Panthers in the preseason, it was a positive result for the New York Jets as they crushed Carolina 27-0. So second year in a row that we get this matchup. And of course, we got the joint practice on Thursday, which was sort of a mixed bag for the New York Jets offensively from an overall standpoint. It was kind of a mixed bag. It was an up and down practice, started slow, finished strong, although at times it still felt like the lows, the struggles in practice were lower than the successes in practice, which was a little bit different than a couple practices ago this week, where Tuesday's practice, the Jets were excellent late in practice. They started slow, but they finished really strong, specifically the offense. Thursday, joint practice, up and down. There was some good, there was some bad, kind of a mixed bag. So we'll really see the Jets second teamers taking on here. And that's where I'll start. I wouldn't expect any of the Jets starters really to start here. You even saw the New York Jets last week sit some of their high-end depth guys. Jamian Sherwood didn't play. You even saw Ashton Davis didn't play. So there was even some guys that you could maybe make the case that should have played that didn't play, or you would have liked to seen play that didn't. So the New York Jets last week sat 28 players, really was mainly a backup, second, third, fourth team guys that were out there. The only starter who did play was Joe Tippmann, and that was because of the snaps. You can understand, smart decision by the Jets to put him out there in a real game environment, a guy that's been struggling with his snaps throughout camp, has gotten better throughout camp, had a good week of practice last week, had a good game, came out of there clean, no bad snaps, had another good week this week. So I would not expect to see Joe Tippmann out there tomorrow. Again, this is just me assuming, but after a good week of practice this week, a successful preseason game last week, a good week of practice the week prior, the snap issues kind of seem to be hitting the rearview mirror at this point. It seems like they've got those things figured out. So again, I wouldn't expect many of the starters to play tomorrow. Now, some of the depth guys that I'm looking out for, and again, the quarterback matchup for this one, I'd assume Tyrod gets the start again. I'd like to see him a little bit more than we saw him last week. He barely played. So I'm sure you'll see Tyrod again to start things off for a couple drives. And nothing official on Carolina's end. Bryce Young didn't play last week, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him out there this week. There's nothing official on it yet at the time of this recording. So I guess we'll say Bryce Young goes out there tomorrow. Last week it was Jack Plummer and a couple other guys that took the field for Carolina. So we'll see. But for the time being, I guess we'll say Tyrod Bryce Young's your starting quarterback matchup, although nothing confirmed there. Now, some players to watch, depth guys, backup guys that I want to see out there tomorrow that we want to see continue to progress and have good camps, of course, good preseason games as well. We got to start with Olu Fashanu. The guy that last week came in, first career NFL game, has had a very successful camp, has looked very good in camp, and went out there last week and was very, very successful. He had the highest PFF pass block grade on the Jets last week. Fashanu finished with an 83.8 pass block grade. He allowed 0 pressures on 14 pass blocking snaps. So a very successful for Fashanu Olu in his debut. Now, he was at left tackle. The details, the big emerging thing this week has been him working in at right tackle, which started on Monday, continued into Tuesday, and continued into joint practice on Thursday, even to the point where Fashanu saw some first-team reps at right tackle on Thursday later on in practice when Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses were sitting out later in practice to limit those reps, as we know throughout training camp here. So I would guess that Fashanu gets an opportunity to start tomorrow right tackle, which I think is pretty interesting and pretty exciting and something to look for. He passed his first test, has really passed every test so far through camp and through preseason with flying colors up to this point in his first couple months in the NFL. And of course, he goes out there, very successful preseason game, now is at right tackle. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do tomorrow at right tackle. How does he look both from a pass blocking perspective and a run blocking perspective? I thought last week he had a couple really nice run blocking reps as well. We all know him for his pass protection, but I thought his run pro was pretty nice as well. So to see him tomorrow, potentially in-game action at right tackle, is definitely an intriguing storyline and something to watch for, no doubt. If he goes out there and plays well, you start to build up more and more confidence that, man, this guy can legitimately be your sixth man on the offensive line, whether it's Tyron Smith or Morgan Moses. If either of them has to miss time, you can trust Olu, who is clearly your best backup, can go out there and fill the shoes of either of those guys. So definitely an emerging thing here in camp that's exciting to watch for. Braylon Allen's another one I'm really looking forward to. Excellent debut for him last week. Had 6 carries for 54 yards, 9 yards per carry. Was excellent on the ground, showing his ability to just plow through defenders, downhill speed up the middle. Everything you wanted to see out of Braylon Allen, you saw it last week. I would love to see more of the same this week. He's another guy I've got my eye on. Isaiah Davis as well, both the running backs. I thought Isaiah Davis had a very, very nice joint practice yesterday. While his stats don't necessarily show what he did from a rushing perspective last week, they're not as successful. He had 4 carries for 8 yards, nothing too crazy. But I thought his receiving numbers were impressive. He had 4 receptions for 33 yards, including 1 reception that went for 24 yards. So Isaiah Davis, similar to Braylon Allen, both guys have emerged this camp as guys that have been utilized well as receiving backs in the passing game, and I really like that. And Isaiah Davis had a rushing touchdown yesterday in joint practice. Did have a drop, but had a couple nice catches as well in the receiving game. Isaiah Davis has really come along here, especially this last couple weeks. So both those running backs are 2 guys I'm looking forward to seeing tomorrow in their continued development. Malachi Corley is another one that I'm another name to look out for. Had 4 catches on 5 targets last week for 27 yards. Statistically, nothing crazy. Doesn't, not eye-popping, although usually you don't get many eye-popping statistics from a any player in the preseason just because of the limited reps. But I liked what I saw out of Corley. I thought you could see his speed. You could see his yak ability. You could see his physicality. I thought on the 5 targets and the 4 receptions he had for 6.8 yards per reception, I thought he looked good, looked comfortable, looked smooth. I thought the route running was fine. So I think him continuing to build on it, all these rookies continuing to see more and more NFL experience is very, very important. That's mainly offensively, rookie-wise. We'll get into some more competitions later on in the offense, but that's really it from an offensive perspective, rookie-wise. And the main things I'm looking for on offense, Fashanu, the 2 running backs. We'll get into competition and stuff like that later on. Some of the depth receivers, I will say as well, that's more competition, though. Peasley and Adrian Martinez, you want to throw them out there. Those are some interesting names as well. 2 guys that were slinging it last week. You go to defense, Quantez Stigers, Jarek Bernard-Converse. We'll start with Jarek Bernard-Converse. JBC was excellent last week, and JBC has been one of the better Jets so far in camp. JBC was so good last week. He was the Jets' highest graded player according to PFF. He had an 87.9 PFF grade overall, and he had an 88.1 coverage grade. He allowed 1 catch on 6 targets. He also had 3 run stops, which ranked second on the team, and didn't miss a tackle at all. For a second-year player who just made the transition to cornerback, a 6th-round pick who barely played last year due to injury, kind of looked like a questionable pick, kind of looked like a guy that was just going to get lost in the shuffle and never really do anything productive for the New York Jets, has completely turned it around so far here in year number 2 and is taking a really, really nice jump for the Jets at cornerback. Was the best player on the Jets last week overall. Statistically, you watch him, he was the best guy on that field, offensively and defensively. So you look for him to repeat that. And it not only builds confidence in the cornerback depth this year, but we've talked about the way the Jets cornerback room is set up. Probably there's going to be a starting spot available next season. Most likely it's probably DJ Reed who walks. And then that leaves the door open for a Quantez Stigers or a Jarek Bernard-Converse to step up and potentially get a starting role. So not only is watching these guys' development important for this year as depth, it's also just nice to see some of these day 3 picks, look good. But it's also important, too, for the future as 2 guys that could potentially see starting roles down the road. So JBC is a guy I'm really looking forward to watching tomorrow and seeing his continued development. Quantez Stigers, another one, 5 tackles last week, had a tackle for loss. I thought he looked pretty good. So interested to see how he can repeat for week number 2. Some guys up front, defensive line. We'll talk more about the D-line here in a little bit, but Eric Watts, Tack McKinley, Braden McGregor, Jalen Holmes, we've talked about these guys a ton. Important for these guys that are fighting for roster spots to put together some good performances in live game action. Leonard Taylor also falls under that billing as well. Some other players to watch, we'll see if they're active. Will McDonald last week played 11 snaps. He was active. I was really impressed with his rep against the Commanders, or one of his reps against the Commanders last week, where he was able to utilize his athleticism, show off his spin move, get to the quarterback. Unfortunately, it was a rough in the passer. Whether or not you agree with the call, it was a rough in the passer is what it is. Other than that, didn't do a whole lot. Otherwise, was a pretty empty stat sheet for Will McDonald last week. So, won a couple of his one-on-one reps yesterday against Carolina at the joint practice. You still would like to see him do a little bit more. You'd like to see him, put together some good production in these preseason games. We'll see. But if he's out there tomorrow, Will McDonald's a name to watch. Michael Clemens is another one to look out for. Got into some fights yesterday. Played last week. Did have a quarterback hit, so you give him credit for that. But Clemens is a guy that, to me, still I still don't have a ton of faith in from a edge rushing perspective to try and fill the shoes of Hassan Reddick. I have zero faith. There's no way he can do that, in my opinion. Now, one preseason game's not going to change it, but you would like to see him at least show some growth. He's a name to watch. He's kind of had a up and down preseason. There's days where he does some good things in camp, then there's days where you don't really see him. There's days where him and McDonald kind of just get body, don't really win their one-on-ones at all. So, Jermaine Johnson's been great. He probably won't play tomorrow. The other edge rushers, it's kind of just a lot of unproven pieces, a lot of unproven. McDonald hasn't shown you a ton. Clemens hasn't shown you a ton. You would like to see some more, so preseason action's good for them. Talked a lot about the linebackers. Sherwood didn't play last week. We'll see if he plays this week. I would like to see Sherwood, though. He's had a very good camp. By far his best camp of his Jet career. Excellent camp. I would like to see him in a game. Not for roster battle-wise. We know he's going to make the roster. We know he's the third linebacker, but he's had a very good camp. He looks the best he's ever looked since being drafted in 2021, making the change from safety over to linebacker. I would like to see him in in-game action, so we'll see if he's out there tomorrow. Chaz Surratt, Zaire Barnes fighting for that fourth linebacker spot. We know Saleh likes Surratt's speed. Zaire Barnes, of course, saw some action last year. Also has had a nice camp. So the linebacker depth is definitely something to watch for. And Jalen Key played last week. Wasn't exactly a very successful opener for Jalen Key. He was among the lowest graded Jets in PFF. Had a 40.7 PFF grade. He's kind of had a very quiet camp. You've very rarely heard of Jalen Key this camp. However, he did make a few plays at Monday's practice. So very small sample size. We'll see what happens. But, he's kind of been non-existent, even in camp, even in practice. You haven't really heard his name much. So we'll see if he can muster up anything tomorrow in the game. Those are the main players to watch. Again, a lot of depth guys. Your biggest names out there tomorrow from a non-rookie perspective will probably be like a Will McDonald, a Michael Clemens. Those would be your highest end guys. Other than that, you're looking Jamie Sherwood. We'll see if the Jets play him. They sat some of their higher end depth guys last week. So we'll see what happens here tomorrow. How many guys are out there? How many guys aren't? And hopefully it's just a productive game. And I will say it as I always do. Health. That's the biggest thing that comes down to with these preseason games. The score doesn't matter. The result doesn't matter. Whether you win 30-0, lose 30-0, tie, whatever the heck it is, it doesn't matter. You got to come out healthy. That's the most important thing. Last week was a success because they came out healthy. If they lose tomorrow 30-0, but they come out healthy, you call it a success. That's all that matters. At the end of the day, this means nothing in the long run from a results perspective. Now, some position battles. Running back 4, Izzy, Xavier Valladay. I think that's pretty much Izzy's at this point, but Valladay could still make a, kind of a late push here. Izzy had the touchdown last week. I know it was a very short yardage red zone touchdown, but he was running behind third, fourth offensive line guys, so you got to give him some credit there. Anytime you score, it's a positive. It certainly helps your stock. I didn't think Valladay did very well last week. He had 8 carries, only had 11 yards. He didn't really impress me much last week. He's had a couple good days at camp, but recently he's kind of gone quiet a little bit, so it feels like Izzy's running away with that. Wide receiver 6 continues to be a very, very, very exciting battle. You've got Jason Brownlee, who scored the touchdown last week and has put together a very good training camp. Malik Taylor's gone quiet. I mean, he's gone extremely quiet from a production standpoint. He didn't play last week either. So Brownlee, Taylor, Irv Charles has had some nice practices recently. I think he makes the team as a special teams threat, more of that Justin Hardy gunner role. So I think he gets onto the team. How much will he actually see action at receiver? Probably very minimum. If Irv Charles is playing a big role at receiver this year, that's a huge problem. But Brownlee, I think Brownlee will probably end up locking up that 6th spot. I think they'll probably hold 7. Irv Charles will probably be like the 7th and then kind of the special teams guy. But even Lance McCutcheon had a good practice, had a good joint practice yesterday, had a couple good practices this week. Rodgers said Lance McCutcheon was a guy that he was impressed with. So he's a name to watch for, especially when you get Aaron Rodgers, obviously, that recognizes your performances. So we'll see how wide receiver 6 continues to pan out. I mean, I would say Brownlee probably has a chance to put the competition to bed. If he goes out there tomorrow and not even just scores a touchdown, let's say he goes out there tomorrow and has like 2 catches for 20 yards or whatever, even 3 catches for like 25 yards. I think you probably put the competition to bed. If he just looks good again, couple catches, I don't see how he doesn't make the team. Defensive line depth, we've talked about it a ton. Eric Watts, Brady McGregor, Tack McKinley. McKinley had a very good week last week. He was very under the radar last week. Was the second highest New York Jets graded player. JBC was the highest at 87.9. We talked about that. McKinley was right behind him at 86.7. Tack McKinley, I think, makes this roster. I am really getting that feeling that Tack McKinley is going to make the roster. So what happens with Watts, Holmes, McGregor, Leonard Taylor still fighting? He's kind of had a streaky camp. There's practices where he does it really good. Then there's practices where he doesn't. So I thought he looked pretty good last week from a pass rushing standpoint. Didn't have a very good week run stopping wise, clogging the interior, but he did have a sack. He did have 2 tackles for loss. Was very impressed with that from a pass rushing standpoint. So we'll see how that all ends up panning out defensive line wise. But you also didn't have the Hassan Reddick situation this bad last week. So you're really going to be watching these edge rushers. You're really going to be watching this defensive line depth, because now this Hassan Reddick situation is a whole lot worse than it was last week. Offensive line depth, the Mitchells of the world, seeing what they can do, Schweitzer, even Xavier Newman. Xavier Newman had a very under the radar solid week last week. He was the highest graded Jets offensive lineman by PFF 83.0. He also had a 90 run blocking grade, and he was third highest among all qualified offensive linemen in the NFL through the first week of preseason. Played both left guard and right guard. So very good week for him, showing some of his versatility. Under the radar last week. Seeing what he can do this week will be important as well, I think, for him and some of those other depth offensive line guys. Carter Warren as well. Continuing to see those guys battle it out behind, of course, your starting 5. And that's pretty much it. Some guys just, wrote down some notes here. The lowest graded Jets last week. Some guys that you probably like to see a little bit more of, or that could use a bounce back week. We talked about Valladay. He was 49.5 PFF grade last week. I wasn't very impressed. Brady McGregor didn't do a whole lot last week. I thought Tanzel Smart, I thought, was better than what his PFF grade showed. He was at 47.9, but he led the team in tackles and had a tackle for loss, so I thought he was better. He also had a sack yesterday, so I think Tanzel Smart's a little bit better than maybe the stats are giving him credit for. And then some guys that were good. I thought Bruce Hector had a pretty good week last week. We talked about Xavier Newman. Izzy was pretty good last week. Peasley, Adrian Martinez. So those guys will be fun watching Peasley and Adrian Martinez sling it tomorrow afternoon. See if Brandon Smith can get another big play. Couple of those other depth guys. But Peasley and Martinez, you've got a legitimate battle for your third quarterback at this point. Legitimately battle. So that'll be fun to watch those two guys battle it out. Of course, that Jordan Travis is still out and not going to play really at all this year. Just sit back and watch with his injury. So that'll do it for another episode of In the Trench to a Gang Green preseason preview, week number 2, Jets Panthers. As I always say, biggest thing, come out of the game healthy. And as long as that happens, I think it's a success if you're the New York Jets. Fashanu at right tackle. Olu out there will be a lot of fun to watch. Continuing to see the running backs. Corley, JBC is a name to watch. He's had a very good camp, so looking forward to watching him out there. So a couple storylines to look for. Main thing, though, is health as we get closer and closer to the start of the season, and closer to the conclusion of the preseason. So stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. We'll have a recap after this game concludes. So stay tuned for that. And as always, hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, Jets, Jets.